It was Halloween 2018. The sky was gray and heavy, and my mom was obsessed with making our house look scarier than the neighbors. I was home from my sophomore year of college, reluctantly tasked with stringing up the hundreds of orange and purple lights. I didn't realize it at the time, but someone had been watching us for days. The first sign that something was off didn't happen on Halloween night. It happened the day after, November 1st, when all the spooky fun had suddenly died, leaving behind only the cold, wet mess of deflated decorations. I was sitting in my room, nursing a massive caffeine headache and scrolling through social media when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. It wasn't a call, just a text message. It read, "She's going to be really upset about the face. Did you see the teeth?" I frowned, rereading it. It was clearly a wrong number, but the message itself felt oddly intimate, referencing something specific that I didn't understand. I typed back, "Wrong number, mate. Good luck." About 30 seconds later, the phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a reply. It was a picture. The photo was close up, dimly lit, and slightly blurry, but I recognized it instantly. It was a photo of one of the carved pumpkins Mom had insisted on putting on the front steps. But not just any pumpkin, it was the pumpkin. The one my sister, Mia, had carved before she went back to her own apartment. It was a grotesque, toothy face that looked more like an attempt at abstract art than a jack-o'-lantern. In the picture, someone had taken a sharp knife and savagely hacked a triangle out of the pumpkin's forehead, completely destroying the symmetry of the face. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach. I walked downstairs. My mom, the overreactor, was in the living room, already mourning the end of her favorite holiday. "Hey, did you or Dad mess with Mia's pumpkin on the steps?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Mom paused her dramatic monologue about the neighborhood spirit. "No, honey, why would we? It's going straight into the compost. Good riddance. That thing was terrifying." I walked to the front door, feeling a strange dread. I opened it and looked down. There were 5 pumpkins on the steps. One of them, Mia's, had a clean, perfect, triangular chunk carved out of its forehead. I felt a sudden, sharp prickle of fear on the back of my neck, the kind you get when you realize you're not alone in a place you should be. The front porch was dimly lit by the remaining string lights, and the air was dead still. No one had been out here today. The weather was too miserable. I'd been home all morning. The text hadn't just been a wrong number, it had been a commentary. I quickly took a photo of the damaged pumpkin, comparing it to the one sent to me. They were identical. I zoomed in on the photo I had received. The lighting was poor, but I could make out a dark, leather-gloved hand holding the pumpkin steady. When I showed the photo and the message to my friend, Mia, the skeptic, she was entirely unimpressed. We were on a video call later that night, and her reaction was immediate and dismissive. "Alex, come on, it's a prank. A neighbor kid saw you all day, walked up to your porch after it got dark, did the damage, snapped a photo, and guessed your number," she said, rolling her eyes. "It's Halloween week, for God's sake. People do stupid stuff, but the number is totally random. And I only used my personal phone for the lights earlier," I argued. "Plus, look at the timestamp. I got the photo seconds after the damage was done. The person was right there. They took a risk on a number, and they got you," she insisted. "Delete the text. Block the number. End of story. Seriously, you're letting a carved pumpkin scare you. You know Mom's decorations attract the weirdos." I wanted to believe her. Mia was the voice of reason, but her logic felt like a thin sheet of ice over a deep, black pond. The idea of a stranger not only walking onto our private property, but also texting me in real time about the petty vandalism felt too targeted, too specific, for a random kid's joke. Over the next few days, the text didn't stop. I blocked the original number, but a new one would pop up almost immediately. The messages were no longer about the pumpkins or the decorations. They were about me. On Saturday, I was sitting on the couch, watching a terrible horror movie and eating a bowl of cold cereal for dinner. My dad was away on a business trip, and Mom was out with friends. I was completely alone in the house. The phone, an anonymous new number, buzzed in my hand. "The blue one has less sugar. You should try mixing it with the oat milk." I froze, the spoon halfway to my mouth. I was eating a massive, ridiculous bowl of Cap'n Crunch cereal, and the only other box in the pantry was the healthier, deep blue Cascadian Farm cereal Mom kept around. And I had just poured a fresh gallon of oat milk into my bowl. something I never usually bought. I slowly lowered the spoon, feeling the heat rise in my face. This wasn't a guess. The living room window was large, facing the wooded backyard, but there was no way anyone could see the color of the cereal box from outside. The nearest neighbor was a good 100 yards away, hidden by thick, leafless trees. I looked around the room, the hair on my arms standing straight up. The house was dead quiet. I looked toward the windows, then the door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I scrambled up, dropped my phone on the sofa, and ran to the kitchen, peering through the small window above the sink. Nothing. Just the black, endless woods. My mind raced. A drone? Unlikely. A hidden camera? Where? I didn't see anything out of place. I walked back to the living room, grabbing my phone. I stared at the message. It was so mundane, so domestic, that it made the threat feel all the more personal and terrifying. It wasn't a message of violence, it was a message of omnipresence. The observer wasn't just watching the house, he was watching me, living my most private, boring life. I typed back, my hands trembling violently. "Who is this? Stop texting me." The reply was instant. "You're not being very hospitable, Alex. Didn't you learn anything from all those scary movies?" The use of my name hit me like a physical blow. The prank was over. This was something else. This was calculated. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by pure, cold panic. I was alone, and someone was close enough to see the contents of my cereal bowl, close enough to know my name, and close enough to find my personal number despite my attempts to block them. I looked up at the ceiling, feeling the psychological trap closing in. I had to know if he was inside the house or just outside. I stood up straight, forcing myself to take a deep, shaky breath, and began to walk very slowly toward the hallway that led to the basement door, my eyes scanning the shadows. I was terrified to make a sound, but I needed to check one place. The first place I checked was the rear entrance to the basement. It was locked from the inside. Then, I crept over to the main basement door, which was tucked away next to the coat closet. My hand reached for the cold, brass knob. It was locked. I leaned my ear against the wood, listening for any sound from the cellar below. Nothing. Just the muffled hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I tried the knob again, just to be sure. It didn't turn. Then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A new message. I pulled it out, my chest seizing up. Checked the window. The word window immediately drew my eye to the large, untreated living room window. In the glass, reflecting the faint interior lights, I could see my own pale face, framed by the dark, empty void outside. I raised my phone to read the message again. As I did, a flicker of movement caught my attention in the reflection. It wasn't outside, it was inside. Reflected in the window, clearly visible in the dark kitchen doorway behind me, was the dark, blurry outline of a person. They were standing perfectly still. They were watching me. I spun around, ready to scream, but the kitchen doorway was empty. The reflection was gone. Had I imagined it? The terror had to be making me hallucinate. I was about to dismiss it when my phone buzzed again. One final, agonizing text. "Look up, above the door, you missed one." My gaze shot straight to the attic access hatch, directly above the closet, a place I hadn't looked in years. The house was silent, the silence screaming at me. My gaze shot straight to the attic access hatch, directly above the coat closet, a place I hadn't looked in years. The house was silent, the silence screaming at me. The hatch was a plain square of painted drywall, flush with the ceiling. It hadn't been opened since my dad had been up there last summer to check the insulation. It was always secured with two small metal sliding latches, a slightly antiquated but sturdy system. But as I stared at it now, through the low, ambient light of the hallway, I saw something that made my stomach completely flip. The hatch was not flush with the ceiling. The corner closest to the main living room, the corner above where I had been sitting, was pushed down by perhaps a quarter of an inch. Just enough to break the seal, just enough to show a sliver of darkness above. And on the white, dusty frame of the hatch, directly above the door handle, there was a faint smudge of dark color. It looked like dirt or dried mud. The realization was a sudden, sickening punch to the gut. They weren't outside. They were here. They had been watching me from above. I didn't pause to think. Adrenaline took over. My instinct wasn't to confront them or call out. It was pure, primal escape. I backed away from the closet, my eyes glued to the slightly open hatch, certain that any second, the drywall panel would creak and a shadow would drop down. I scrambled for the keys on the hook by the front door, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. I finally managed to grab the keyring and unlock the deadbolt. I didn't bother with a jacket or my wallet. I ran out the front door, slamming it behind me, and sprinted blindly across the wet, dark lawn and down the driveway. I only stopped when I reached the curb of the road, hiding behind the cover of the biggest, oldest oak tree, breathless and hyperventilating. I called my mom. It went straight to voicemail. Then I called Dad, who was 2 states away. He answered, his voice groggy. "Dad, someone is in the house. I got texts and I saw the attic hatch, it's open. Please, you have to call the police. I'm outside." My voice was a choked, pathetic gasp, completely unrecognizable. My dad, the calm thinker, was instantly alert. Okay, Alex. I'm calling them right now. Get back to the neighbor's house, Mrs. Henderson's. Do not go back in the house. Stay on the line." I hung up, knowing the police would want to talk to him as the homeowner. I then stood there, huddled against the massive tree, watching the dark, silent house. Every window was a black eye staring back at me. The synthetic fog machine, still programmed for Halloween, suddenly kicked on, filling the front yard with a low, unnatural mist. The effect was terrifyingly cinematic. 10 minutes later, 2 police cars arrived, their blue and red lights flashing silently, casting eerie shadows that danced across the neighbor's carefully manicured lawn. I ran out to meet them, pointing frantically at the house. The 2 officers, a young woman and an older man, were professional and methodical. They went inside, flashlights cutting through the darkness. I was left shivering on the porch, waiting for the all clear, but also dreading what they might find. After what felt like an hour, the older officer, Sergeant Miller, came back out. "Alex, we've done a full sweep," he said, his voice flat. "Perimeter is secure. The basement is locked. All windows and doors are secured from the inside. We even went up to the attic. It's a mess up there, old boxes and dust, but absolutely no sign of forced entry, no indication that anyone is or has been in there recently." My heart sank. "But the hatch, Sergeant, it was pushed down, and I saw the smudge. I got texts saying they were watching me. They knew what cereal I was eating." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "We checked the hatch, son. It was secured, and there was no dirt or anything to indicate recent disturbance. Look, those text messages, people get wrong numbers all the time. Sometimes they're just messed up pranks. We took a report, but without any sign of actual breaking and entering, there's not much we can do. We'll keep an extra eye on the area tonight." He was giving me the classic skeptic response, the polite dismissal. I realized then that my panic, my frantic escape, and my absurd story about cereal had made me sound completely unhinged. They didn't believe me. The moment the police left, my dad called. He told me to stay at the Hendersons' house until my mother came home. When Mom finally got back, she was distraught but immediately took charge. She was sympathetic, but she also spent a lot of time checking the locks and windows, and her worried glances at the attic hatch told me she was caught between believing me and believing the police. She and I stayed up until dawn, huddled on the living room sofa. The next morning, the horror finally set in. It wasn't the police dismissal or the idea of an intruder that broke me. It was the psychological terror that this person had been in the house, in my space, and no one believed me. The feeling of not being trusted, of your reality being invalidated, felt almost worse than the initial fear. Mom called the locksmith immediately to change the locks, but I knew that wasn't the real solution. If he could get into the attic, a deadbolt wouldn't stop him. A few weeks later, after Mom had insisted on having the heating ducts and vents professionally cleaned just for peace of mind, the final, most terrifying piece of the puzzle fell into place. The HVAC technician found a small, cheap, coin-sized recording device taped high up inside one of the main return air vents in the upstairs hallway. It wasn't a camera, it was a microphone. The police were called back, and this time, they took the situation seriously. The device contained a few days of audio. Most of it was just static, the rumble of the furnace and the white noise of a house living. But at the very end of the recording, there was a faint, chilling whisper, overlaid on the sound of me eating my Cap'n Crunch. The whisper wasn't a direct threat, or a statement, or a question. It was just one phrase, repeated on a low loop, right as I was about to type my reply to the first threatening text. "No, Alex. Don't block me. I'm almost finished." The police couldn't trace the device, or the numbers. The numbers were burners, and the microphone was cheap, untraceable Chinese hardware. The man was never caught. I didn't stay in that house for long. I finished the semester and transferred to an apartment near campus, convinced that a quiet suburb wasn't safe anymore. But the psychological scar remains. Every time my phone buzzes with an unfamiliar number, or I hear a creak in my apartment ceiling, I immediately stop, listening. Because I know the truth. The wrong number wasn't a mistake. It was a contact request from someone who had already lived with me, silently sharing my air, watching me from the darkness. And to this day, I can't look at an attic access panel without feeling that cold, paralyzing dread that someone is up there, just waiting for the last light to go out. My name is Maya, and for 3 years, I worked the graveyard shift at a regional 911 dispatch center in rural Ohio. People think that working 911 means constant action, but in the small hours, it's mostly pocket dials, kids messing around, and the occasional lonely elderly person who just wants to hear a human voice. You get very good at recognizing a fake call, and even better at tuning out the background noise of true desperation. This all happened in February 2021, a night that started like any other. The air conditioning was humming too loudly, the fluorescent lights flickered annoyingly, and I was trying to stay awake by chewing through a bag of stale gummy worms. At 2:47 a.m., a call came through. It wasn't a 911 line. It was our rarely used unlisted administrative line, the one reserved for internal staff in police departments. I answered with my standard, tired greeting. "Dispatch," Maya speaking. "Into 7. There was silence on the other end, but it wasn't the dead silence of a dropped call. It was a breathing silence. I could hear the faint, ragged intake and exhale of someone on the other end. "Hello, you've reached an unlisted line. Can I help you?" I repeated, already sensing this wasn't going to be routine. A voice finally came on the line. It was a man, his voice rough, low, and strangely calm. He didn't sound panicked, or drunk, or in distress. He sounded resigned. "I know this is the wrong number," he said. "I was trying to call my lawyer. This is what I get for trying to do things quietly." I paused. He knew he dialed the wrong number, yet he stayed on the line. That was my first clue. "Sir, this is a secured police line. If you need a lawyer, you should hang up and try the number again," I instructed, keeping my tone neutral. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Oh, I don't think so. I think this is exactly the number I needed to call." I reached immediately for my secondary keyboard and started the automated location trace. Even though the call wasn't on the emergency line, it was a long shot. "Sir, if you are experiencing an emergency, or if you feel you are in danger, please tell me where you are." "I'm not in danger, Maya," he replied. The use of my name wasn't a surprise. We had standard greetings, but the way he said it, like a tired acknowledgement, was unnerving. "The only person in danger is the one I'm talking about, the one in the well." I felt the blood drain from my face. A well was a euphemism in our line of work, a horrible shorthand for a body disposal or a hidden victim. This was no prank. This was a confession. "Sir, I need you to be very clear with me. Are you saying someone is injured or trapped?" I pressed, forcing my voice to remain steady. Inside, I was already drafting a potential code for the police to trace him. "Trapped? No. Injured? Yes. Permanently," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "It was the third one. The one I should have left alone. She kept screaming about the phone, about calling her sister. I couldn't have that. It was messy. So I put her where she couldn't call anyone." The cold, matter-of-fact delivery of his words, talking about a murder with the same casual tone someone might use to discuss traffic, was the most terrifying part. It wasn't emotional or dramatic. It was procedural. "You're talking about a crime," I said, and I knew I had to keep him talking. "I need to know exactly where this person is. Give me a location." He sighed, a long, drawn-out sound of pure exhaustion. "Why? So you can get her out? She's gone. Besides, you won't find the well. It's on the property line, buried under the old barn." No one uses that barn anymore. No one knows it's there. My location trace finally pinged. It was an initial tower location, not a precise GPS, but it was something. The call was coming from an area about 40 miles outside our jurisdiction, deep in a sparsely populated section of the county. A rural, forgotten place. I glanced over at my partner, Mark the skeptic, who was sipping coffee and looking bored at his station. I silently mouthed, "Homicide confession. Get a supervisor." Mark, ever the cynic, simply raised an eyebrow, gave me a lazy thumbs up, and went back to his coffee, assuming I was dealing with a drunk man. I realized I was on my own for this. "Tell me about the sister, sir. She seems important to you," I said, trying to steer the conversation away from the gruesome details and back towards a person. The confessor. I needed to understand his motivation. The sister. She kept calling the wrong number, kept calling her, days after I put her in the well. She was desperate. You know that feeling? The desperation? It drives you crazy. And I had the phone. I had to let her know it was pointless. So, I answered it. Just once. "What did you say to her?" I said, "She's busy. Don't call this number again." I hung up immediately. It worked. The call stopped. He paused. "But that's why I'm calling my lawyer now. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have answered that call." I realized what he was doing. He wasn't confessing to me. He was confessing through me. He had dialed his lawyer to ask about the legal ramifications of having answered the victim's phone, thinking he had been smart by not talking about the murder. He had called the wrong number, and now he was rationalizing the entire situation to a captive audience. He was telling me everything he had intended to tell his lawyer. "Sir, the sister deserves to know what happened to her sibling," I said, making a personal appeal. "You said she was your third victim. What about the others? You need to tell me who they are." A sudden, sharp burst of static hissed on the line, like a hand had moved too quickly over the microphone. The calm, resigned voice suddenly sharpened with a note of cold anger. "No, we're done with this. This was a mistake. I should have just called the police line. They never listened to anything. You're listening too closely, Maya. You should never listen this closely to a wrong number." The line went dead. The call lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The line went dead. The call lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I slammed the receiver down, my body vibrating with a delayed rush of cold panic. Mark, seeing my face, finally stopped sipping his coffee. "What the hell, Maya? You look like you saw a ghost," he asked, finally paying attention. "Homicide, Mark. 3 victims. The third is in a well under an old barn, 40 miles out. I need the supervisor, now. And start a full trace on that number. I don't care if it's the admin line, pull the call data immediately." Mark's easy cynicism vanished. He was up and moving, heading for the supervisor's glass office. Within minutes, the center shifted. The admin line call was treated like a major event. The local sheriff's department and the state police were contacted, and a task force was formed to cross-reference our brief, chilling transcript with any missing persons cases in the Tri-County area. The problem, as Sergeant Dale, our supervisor, patiently explained to me, was one of jurisdiction and evidence. "Maya, you did great keeping him on the line, but we have a major issue," Sergeant Dale said, running a hand through his thin hair. The number he used was a disposable burner phone. The trace hit the nearest tower, which covers about a 20-mile radius of pure farmland. We have nothing but a vague location and a highly unbelievable story of a well under an old barn to go on. "But he used the victim's phone to answer her sister," I argued. "That's our lead. We need to find the sister and find out who she was calling." "We're looking," Dale sighed. "But we're dealing with possibly 3 unconnected murders over a span of time." The guy was rambling, Maya. He called the wrong number looking for his lawyer. He was clearly trying to offload guilt, but he's already cold and calculating enough to use a burner. "We'll investigate, but you need to temper your expectations. These things rarely pan out like they do on TV." I went home after my shift, utterly exhausted and haunted. I couldn't shake the image of the man's calm, resigned voice, the casual way he talked about the third one. The psychological weight of holding that confession, knowing that 3 people were dead and I was the only one who truly knew the details, was suffocating. I couldn't sleep. I kept going over the transcript in my head. She kept screaming about the phone, about calling her sister. The sister, she kept calling the wrong number. The phrase "wrong number" was the hook. The sister thought she was calling her missing sibling, but the killer had the phone, and by answering, he had used the victim's identity to silence the search. Then, a chilling thought struck me. If the sister kept calling the wrong number, her sister's phone, then I was the one who had received the true wrong number call from the killer. He had dialed the wrong number for his lawyer and ended up with a 911 dispatcher. It was a cosmic, horrible mistake. I went back to the center later that day. I knew exactly what I needed to do, even if it was a total violation of protocol. I sat down at my terminal, logged in, and used the secure database to search all missing persons reports in the area over the last 2 years that involved a wrong number or unanswered calls as a key detail. It took hours, but one file stood out immediately. Jenna Rourke, missing, age 26, from the county adjacent to ours 2 years prior. Her case went cold almost immediately. The initial report was filed by her sister, Sarah Rourke. The key detail: Sarah claimed she had received a chilling, one-word text message from Jenna's number days after she vanished. Busy. Sarah had called the number repeatedly afterward, but the calls always went to voicemail or were immediately dropped. The police dismissed the text as a possible runaway, or a way for Jenna to throw them off, despite Sarah's insistence that the tone wasn't right. I pulled Sarah Rourke's contact information and the log of the calls she made to her sister's number in the days following the disappearance. The numbers were all logged as going to Jenna's cell until 2 days after the initial disappearance. On that day, Sarah Rourke called her sister's number 5 times. The first 4 times went to voicemail. The 5th time, the call lasted exactly 4 seconds. No voice on Sarah's end, just a static connection that abruptly ended. I stared at the 4-second call. The killer said, I answered it. Just once. I said, "She's busy. Don't call this number again." I hung up immediately. It worked. The call stopped. The killer's story, his own wrong number call to me, confirmed the busy text. But I realized the wrong number calls the sister was making were calls to the victim's phone, and the killer had answered just one time, and hung up. I printed out the key details of the Jenna Rourke file and the log of calls. I walked directly into Sergeant Dale's office. "Sergeant, I found the 3rd victim, Jenna Rourke, missing 2 years, and the sister, Sarah Rourke, got the call he was talking about." I laid the files on his desk, pointing to the 4-second call log. He answered her phone one time. He said so on the call. My breakthrough was met with stunned silence, quickly followed by focused action. The police immediately cross-referenced the vague location for my trace with the Rourke family property. They found it, a large, dilapidated, inherited farmhouse, and an accompanying abandoned barn that was being sold for back taxes. No one had been on the property for years. The next day, the search team found it. Under the rotting floorboards of the old barn, hidden beneath a pile of dry earth and construction debris, was a crudely covered, circular brick lining an old, abandoned cistern, or well. Jenna Rourke's body was found at the bottom. The police later confirmed she had died of a fatal blow to the head days before her missing person report was filed. The subsequent investigation linked the farmhouse owner, an older man named Robert Finley, who had inherited the property years ago, to 2 other unsolved, cold missing persons cases in the region. He was arrested, tried, and convicted for all 3 murders based largely on the evidence found in the well, and the chilling confession he made to the wrong number, me at 2:47 a.m. The day after the conviction, Sarah Rourke called the center and asked to speak to me. She was emotional, choked up, and spent several minutes just thanking me for listening, for believing, and for finding her sister. Before she hung up, she said one thing that stuck with me, a final, chilling note of psychological horror that confirmed the true nature of the whole incident. "You know, Maya," she said, her voice trembling. When I got that 4-second answer and they immediately hung up, I always knew. I knew she was gone, but I kept calling anyway. I was just calling a number, hoping for a miracle. I realized then that the killer, in his cold, calculated attempt to cover his tracks and silence the sister, had accidentally contacted a police dispatcher, leading to his undoing. But the final haunting moment for me was this. The killer didn't call the police. He didn't text them. He reached out to his lawyer. He wasn't afraid of the police. He was afraid of his legal problems. His conscience didn't crack. His calculation did. And that, more than the bodies in the well, told me everything I needed to know about the quiet, terrifying reality of a true killer. To this day, every time I answer the administrative line at night, I get a small, sick flutter of dread, waiting for another wrong number that contains a truth too horrific to dismiss. I work as a freelance web designer, which means my world revolves around my phone. I'm glued to it from 8 a.m. to midnight, and I constantly switch numbers and carriers to get the best deals. This story started in the summer of 2019, right after I ported my old, familiar number, my primary contact for nearly 8 years, to a new carrier, a process that should have been seamless. A few days after the transfer, my phone started ringing at the same time every day, 4:08 p.m. The first few times, I ignored it. It was a blocked number, and my rule is simple. If you want to talk to me, unblock your number. But the persistence was unnerving. 4:08 de l'après-midi, every single day, like clockwork. Finally, on the 5th day, my curiosity got the better of me. I was between client calls, and the phone buzzed, the name coming up as private caller. I swiped to answer, ready to snap at the automated telemarketer. "Hello, you've reached Alex." There was a heavy, sighing breath on the other end, followed by the clearest sound of an old, scratchy vinyl record skipping. Click, skip, skip, click. It was a very distinct, mechanical sound that I hadn't heard since I was a kid rummaging through my grandfather's attic. Then, a woman's voice, faint and wavering, spoke. It wasn't a young voice, but it wasn't exactly old either. It sounded tired, distant, and deeply, profoundly sad. Is this the line?" she whispered. "Ma'am, I think you have the wrong number." "I just got this number a few days ago," I said, already annoyed that I'd wasted my time. No, that can't be right. I always use this one." "This is the only line that works," she insisted, her voice gaining a desperate, frantic edge. "He told me to use this one. He said to never use the other one." "Is he there? Is Jack there?" "Ma'am, I don't know any Jack. You have the wrong number," I repeated, harsher this time. She made a sound like a small, broken sob. "The wrong number. Oh God, I can't handle this. I have to go back. I have to go back to the beginning." And then she hung up. The dial tone was immediately followed by that distinct click, skip, skip, click of a vinyl record. I shook my head, already forgetting about it. A confused older lady who had saved an old number incorrectly. It happens. But the next day, at 4:08 p.m., the phone rang again. "Private caller," I answered, expecting the same exchange. Is this the line?" the same voice whispered, the same scratchy vinyl sound playing faintly in the background. "Look, ma'am, I told you yesterday, you have the wrong number. I am not Jack. I am not related to him. Stop calling this number," I snapped. She let out a small, quiet, desperate gasp of air. "Yesterday? No, you don't understand. I haven't called since the last time. It's only been an hour, maybe less. They'll notice. I'm gone. I have to go back to the beginning." The sheer terror in her voice was what stopped me. The desperation was not faked. She genuinely seemed to believe that only an hour had passed since her last attempt. I felt a confusing mix of pity and sudden, sharp curiosity. "Ma'am, it's been 24 hours, I said, trying to be gentle. "It's 4:08 p.m. You called me yesterday at the exact same time." A long, agonizing silence followed, filled only with the relentless, unsettling rhythm of the skipping record. "It's the loop," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's happening again. The beginning is the worst. I can't go back to the beginning." And she hung up, once again, the distinct sound of the skipping vinyl cutting the call short. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became a terrifying part of my routine. 4:08 p.m. every day. The call, the voice, which I mentally named the caller, was always slightly fainter, slightly more desperate, and always seemed to think only an hour had passed, convinced she had only just made a failed attempt to reach Jack. I became obsessed with the details. I recorded the calls and played them back. The voice was always the same. The scratchy, skipping record in the background was always the same. I did a reverse search on the origin of the number I'd been assigned, It turned out the number had belonged to an elderly woman who passed away 3 years prior. She had lived in a small, isolated rural town about 100 miles from me. The carrier had simply recycled the number after a period of dormancy. I told my partner, Ben, the overreactor, about the calls. He immediately demanded I change my number again. "Alex, this is freaky. It's the dead woman's number. That's why she keeps calling. You're getting a ghost call, man. Just change it. Block the private caller," he urged, fear plastered across his face. "I can't block a private number, Ben. You know that. And the number is my main business line. I just got it ported. I'd lose hundreds in clients. It's just a woman with severe dementia who can't let go of an old number," I countered, though the explanation felt hollow. The click, skip, skip, click of the vinyl was too specific, too mechanical for a random person. Then I had a thought. The caller kept mentioning the line in the beginning. She kept trying to reach Jack and only had this one working number. If she was stuck in a time loop, repeating the same mistake, then her calls weren't getting out to me. They were being pulled in by the number itself. I realized that if I was getting her call every day at 4:08 p.m., then someone else had been getting her call at 4:08 p.m. every day for the past 3 years. This number, my number, was a nexus point for an ongoing psychological horror. I decided to try and break her loop. On a Saturday, I set an alarm for 4 p.m. I had the recorder ready. I planned to gently remind her of the date, the time, and the reality of the situation. I would be the calm, matter-of-fact voice of the present. The phone rang at 4:08 p.m. Private caller. I answered on the first ring. "Hello, ma'am. This is Alex. It's Saturday, August 12th. It's been 3 years since you last used this number. You need to stop calling." A pause. Then, the woman's voice was suddenly clearer, closer, and far more frantic than it had ever been. There was no vinyl skipping sound, just her ragged breathing. 3 years? No, that's impossible. I only just picked up the phone. He told me to use the white one. He said the red one was already dead. "Where is Jack? Tell him I'm at the back door." And I heard the sound on the floor. "He said to call you if I heard it." The details were now fresh, immediate, and utterly terrifying. She wasn't an elderly woman with dementia calling an old friend. She was describing a moment of immediate, intense panic. She was talking to me from a specific point in time, the real time, 3 years ago. "What sound, ma'am? What do you hear on the floor?" I whispered, my heart slamming against my ribs. I had breached the loop, and the reality of her historical trauma was flooding into my present. "What sound, ma'am? What do you hear on the floor?" I whispered, my heart slamming against my ribs. I had breached the loop, and the reality of her historical trauma was flooding into my present. Her voice was raw, a thin, panicked shriek barely contained. The dripping. Like a leaky faucet, but it's too thick. And it's not water. I looked under the door. It's moving. It's moving under the rug. I can see the rug getting wet. Oh God. Jack isn't answering the back door. I pressed the mute button on my end, my hand shaking violently. This was a direct line to a crime, an emergency happening 3 years ago. The horror was in the present tense. I had to assume that the Jack she was calling was the one who had told her to use the white line, a safe line that was now my number, and the red one was her original line, now dead. The dripping could only be one thing. "Ma'am, listen to me. This is Alex. If you are hearing something on the floor, you need to leave the house right now. Forget the door. Go out the window. Go now." "I can't leave," she wailed. "I can't leave the line. He said if I leave the line, I'll forget. I'll go back to the beginning. He'll find me in the beginning. Jack said I have to stay here, by the phone, until he comes back." I looked down at the floor, suddenly acutely aware of the silence in my own apartment. The fear of being watched, of being trapped, which she was experiencing in her last moments, was contagious. She wasn't afraid of the dripping, but of the consequence of breaking her routine. "Ma'am, I'm going to call the police to your address. I need you to tell me exactly where you are," I said, my voice urgent and loud. A pause. A horrifying, wet shuffling sound came over the line. Then her voice, now a ragged, exhausted whisper. "Too late. He's here." I heard the lock turn. "He's coming to the back door." "But I used the line, Jack. I used the white one. I did what you said. I didn't use the red one." She let out a short, terrifying, defeated exhale. And then, the line did not drop. The phone did not go dead. Instead, the sound that flooded the line was the click, skip, skip, click of the vinyl. louder and clearer than ever before, sounding like it was right next to my ear. It had returned. The loop had reset, but this time, it was different. When the mechanical skipping stopped, a new voice came on the line. It was a man's voice, low, smooth, and laced with an unsettling, cruel calm. Not Jack, the one she was running from. "You shouldn't have picked up, Alex," he said. The voice was so close, so immediate, that I literally recoiled from the phone. "Who is this?" I demanded, my throat tight. "This is the wrong number," he chuckled, the sound devoid of all humor. I told her that the white line was the dead line, not the safe one, and she was a fool to believe me. But she's back where she belongs now, back at the beginning of the loop, calling the wrong number forever. And I told her that if anyone ever answered her call, anyone she didn't know, I would hear it. I hear everything on this line. It's my line now. He wasn't talking about the phone line. He was talking about the number. He had somehow claimed the memory, the digital footprint of the number, and trapped the victim's final call within it. The clicking was the record of her last call, the loop of her final minutes of terror. And by answering, I had alerted him. "I'm calling the police," I said, trying to project confidence. "No, you're not, because you have no idea where to send them. She told you too much, Alex. And now you're attached to the line, too. The wrong number has a long memory. And now, you're part of it." Then, he hung up. The line went completely silent. No dial tone, no skipping vinyl. Just the thick, deafening silence of an empty connection. I never called the police. I didn't have a location, only a name, Jack, and the description of a crime that happened years ago, which I had experienced as a phantom transmission. The police would have dismissed it as a prank or a hallucination. The psychological element of the attack was its perfection. The crime was unsolvable, and the terror was delivered directly to my ear. I didn't change my number immediately. I was too afraid to. The thought that changing it would only assign the number and its terrifying history to another unsuspecting person, pulling them into the observer's loop, filled me with a sickening guilt. I finally changed my number a month later, but the psychological damage was done. My mind had been forced to witness an unsolved murder. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, right around 4-8 p.m., my phone, with its new, clean number, will vibrate softly. I'll pick it up, and there's never a call. Just an unread, ghost text message from an unsaved number. It's always a single, cryptic phrase, which I immediately delete. But I always remember the first one I got, the day after I changed my number. It read, "Don't worry, Alex. The beginning is always the worst. The ghost of the wrong number is still out there, looping, and I'm always afraid that one day, my new number will become the next line, waiting for the sound of a terrified woman looking for a Jack who will never answer."